And finally tonight, our Persons of the Week. The movie Lincoln opens nationally next week, and it's a portrait of 42 days in the life of a man bearing the weight of a crushing responsibility. A man determined to pass an amendment ending slavery and hold the nation together. The director Steven Spielberg says he's been drawn to Lincoln as a timeless moral compass from the day he first saw the Lincoln Memorial almost 60 years ago.
I have this recollection from my childhood when my uncle took me to the Lincoln Memorial, and you're led into this dark kind of rotunda, and there is a giant sitting in a chair.
What did you see in his face? Do you remember?
I felt he was looking directly at me. And that was it.
The boy who grew up to be a director carrying a dream and knowing there was only one actor for this role, but for nearly 8 years, Daniel Day-Lewis, who grew up in England and Ireland, said no. It would be impossible to embody America's most dearly loved president.
This seemed like just such an important thing. Last thing I wanted to do was to desecrate the memory of the most dearly loved president of this country. So it took some time. It took a lot of time and a lot of shyness around it.
Yes.
But at a meeting last year, Spielberg kept seeing Lincoln in his face and so sneaked out his camera. You snapped a photo?
Yeah, I didn't tell him I did that.
You didn't?
When did you do that?
Oh, a long time ago. You don't need to know about that. and I just went with my little, like that. So a hip shot. It was just right off the hip.
I love the idea of you as paparazzi.
Exactly.
And then, there it was on the screen. Lincoln, daunting, monumental, fully human.
He was awkward to look at, and his voice didn't fit his stature, and he would just disarm a room with a crazy story that had no relevance to the issue.
Time is a great thickener of things, but
Yes, I suppose it is. Actually, I have no idea what you mean by that.
If no one else laughed at the stories, he'd be the first one to guffaw at the story he'd be telling.
And the actor who grew up in another country found Abraham Lincoln's famous reedy voice.
One day I got a little cassette tape in the mail from Daniel, and when I turned on the cassette player, I heard the president speaking to me.
I like our chances now.
And so they were ready to go with a brilliant screenplay by Tony Kushner about coarse politics.
You are more reptile than man, George.
And the noblest goals. Inside the film, there are details from a time capsule. The Kentucky Historic Society let them use the real sound of Lincoln's real watch.
Whenever you hear that gentle ticking, that's the ticking that Lincoln himself heard 150 years ago.
A man forced to make wrenching decisions, and a different portrait of the wife by his side.
Mrs. Lincoln.
Madam President, if you please.
Mary Lincoln, who had once been the girl every man courted, but chose this rough-hewn country lawyer because she saw something in him, perhaps before he did. Sally Field, in a marriage at once searing and loving, warning her husband that he alone can and must end slavery and end the Civil War.
Because if you fail to acquire the necessary votes, woe unto you, sir, you will answer to me.
And so one very human man
Blood's been spilled to afford us this moment now.
creates one nation with a vision of what we can be at our best.
Shall we stop this bleeding?
As inaccessible as he seems initially, because one stands like a 5-year-old in front of a monument, you discover so quickly that you just never want to let him go.
And so we choose Daniel Day-Lewis and Steven Spielberg for bringing us Lincoln the movie, which is distributed by our parent company Disney, opening next Friday, and Lincoln the President, who always believed we will rise toward the better angels of our nature.